regardless of race, color, gender, disability, sexual orientation, age, or national origin. We would like to offer a special welcome to our visitors, and we invite you to join us for our coffee hour following the service. We hope you will enjoy worshiping with us, and that you will feel at home here at West Shore Church. We'd like to call your attention to the order of service for announcements and information on upcoming events. Also, check the tables in the hall for other events and activities. There are a few things that aren't in the order of service. West Shore Child Care Center is holding an open house Wednesday afternoon, May 15th from 4:30 until 6. Visit the program and learn how great it is. You will be pleased. And for next Sunday, but Sunday, May the 12th, that's today. May 19th is this Sunday, announcement before May the 12th. Former member of West Shore, Jan Burlin, will be the soloist next Sunday, May 19th. He will be accompanied by Mary Ann Masters, a well-known concert pianist, and Midge Skwire has things to say.
Thanks, Kim. I have a couple of announcements that I would like to make. Our organist, Fern Jennings, who never misses a Sunday, is going to be absent next week for a very important reason. She's graduated from Case Western Reserve University with a bachelor's degree. Congratulations, Fern, and I would like to take this opportunity to congratulate all of our other graduates of this May and this June. And when you come down here and you find a mug on the piano for you. The last lecture in our series, our 50th anniversary series, will be on May 24th. The speaker, Tandeka, has changed the subject of her talk, so I wanted to make sure that you got the new topic. The title is currently Religion and Middle-Class Poverty in the 21st Century. And she'll be discussing the way that personal religious beliefs shape government policy for the American middle class. Andeka, who is assistant professor at Williams College, was given the name Andeka by Bishop Desmond Tutu in 1984 after an evening of discussing religion. It means one who is loved by God. Several members of this congregation, and especially me, have heard her speak in the last year or two, and she is a dynamic and inspiring speaker. This will be a wonderful close for our series, and we hope that you can join us. Tickets will be available either at the office or in the hallway. And finally, I'd like to introduce our guest preacher for the day, not a new person to many of you. It is the Reverend Wayne Shuttee, who was minister of West Shore for its first decade. He came to us after being assistant to the Reverend Dr. Everett Moore Baker at the Shaker Church, and has served only, First Church, that's what it was called, yeah, excuse me, before it was in Shaker. Is that right? Roberta's down here correcting me. I'm going to introduce her. Sorry about that. He served only 2 settled ministries, here and 30 years at the church in New Haven, Connecticut. He and his wife Pat maintain their home in New Haven, while Wayne moves around that general area serving interim. And he is currently serving an interim at the church in Mount Kisco, New York. So we're delighted to have him here today and welcome him to our pulpit. Thank you.
we gather together today as a community of memory and hope. In our continuing celebration of our 50 years as a free spiritual community, we remember how this congregation came into being and our responsibility in carrying on its founding vision. We drink from wells we did not dig. We have been warmed by fires we did not build. We light this chalice in thanksgiving for those who have passed their life to us. Would you please join us in singing hymn number 39 in your hymn book, Bring, O Lord, Thy Music.
A well-known Unitarian of the 19th century, who also wrote the words to the Ballad of the Republic. Her intention in establishing the first Mother's Day was to create a day of peace, with women all over the world working together to end war. Her reasoning was that it was the mothers who have the baby and who raise the children, and therefore have the responsibility to convince world leaders to find peaceful ways of settling conflict. Let us read her words responsibly. Arise then, women of this day.
Arise, all women who have hearts, whether your baptism be that of water or of tears.
Say firmly, we will not have the great questions decided by irrelevant agencies.
Our husbands shall not come to us, reading the carnage, or caresses and laws.
Our sons shall not be taken away from us to unlearn all we have been able to teach them of charity, mercy, and patience.
We live in a country who believes in tender for those of that country, all our sons be trained into their prayers.
From the bosom of the devastated a voice goes up with our own. It says, disarm, disarm.
The sword and murder is not balance of justice. War love does not have dishonor, nor violence mediate possession.
As men have often forsaken the plow and the anvil at the summons of war, let women now leave all that may be left of home for a great and earnest day of council.
Let them be first as women to bewail and commemorate the dead.
Let them then solemnly take counsel with each other as the means whereby the great human family can live in peace.
And each sharing after one time the sacred interest, not of Caesar, but of God.
You may be seated, and I would ask that the members of the Board of Trustees, past and present, come forward. Not all the past ones, the retired ones. I have the sanctuary filled here. Would you bring your order of service with you? If I could have the past, the retiring members over on this side, and so that they can see retiring members on this side. Look at it. You can see their names listed in the order of service. Will you please join me in the service of installation? The governance of a church should embody its ideals. Today we recognize those who have been elected to serve this church as trustees in the coming year. These are the people who will make choices, who will sift and sort and select priorities, and who will bear the responsibility of acting for this congregation. You have been elected by this congregation to serve as trustees of the West Shore Unitarian Universalist Church. In assuming that office, you take on responsibility for the spiritual well-being of our church and the temporal well-being too. What you will do, in large measure, determines the effectiveness of our congregation. Therefore, we ask you to affirm your purpose today for this congregation. Will each of you give diligent attention to the needs of this congregation, both spiritual and temporal? Will you support the growth of liberal religion as expressed through the principles and purposes of the Unitarian Universalist Association? And will you work to help this congregation respond to the needs of the larger community? Do you, the members of this congregation, receive and recognize these persons as trustees of our church and promise to support them in their work?
We do. We are grateful for your willingness to serve our church in this forward capacity. We charge you to work with us to hold the principles of our free faith as you go about your duties in the year ahead.
I've asked the retiring board members to come forward that we might recognize them for their service.
Thank you for the leadership that you have provided and for your faithful service as trustees of the church.
And I'd like at this time to give this chalice to the retiring board president, Leanne. West Shore's statement of purpose. We welcome all to join us in affirming the vision of our forebears by fostering a spiritual community where open minds celebrate inquiry and diversity, open hearts respond with love to the pain and promise of the world, and open hands work for peace and justice.
give some Grieg, and this Sunday we're going to sing the Dvorak.
be together in the spirit of meditation and of prayer. Here is a day of promise. May it be so with me and with everyone. The gray clouds scudding overhead, the storm clouds and rain and the breaking sunshine, the apple blossoms bursting in pink and white, and the children gleefully running out to splash in the leftover puddles. The grass green and the buds straining into leaves on shrubs and trees, and the birds singing joyfully in the dawn, strutting the lawns as proud possessors. Everywhere life. Life bursting through all feathers, and the heart singing, protesting against gloom, shouting its defiance of clouds and cold. The gay heart exulting in storm and sunshine alike. This is a day that aches with the promise of life, life which will not be denied. Let all our hearts swell with glad acceptance, joyful with the sense of the always becoming. For out of earth, into the air and sunshine, out of ourselves, there arises a spirit in each of us. Neither dark nor threat shall thrust it down. It rises irresistible in us. This is the season's gift. Amen. Religious Education Director of West Shore Church, Roberta Julian, who served here from 1951 to 1958. Roberta is now located in Baltimore, Maryland, and is a member of the church there. And she's here this morning with her daughter, Sue Todd. And welcome to both of you. Right from there.
We who were present at the creation for what this great church has become. How firm a foundation you have built upon. What I remember are the names: Schaefer, Brown, Jackson, Schumacher, Arnold, Mayer, Black, Eisenbach, Braunbacher, Walther, Ross, Wally, Howard, Frank, Weldon, so many more. I see their faces and hear their voices, and I remember the great commitment that possessed us all. Ruth Mennel said, "When there is a night I don't go to a meeting, I feel as if life is passing me by." We wanted it for our children and for ourselves. By the time the first building had been completed, the church school had outgrown it. Our young people were so involved, parents complained they didn't see enough of them anymore. I used to drive the Baker Club around, and my poor sense of direction led Elsa Walther to say, "Whenever I go anywhere with Mrs. Julian, I feel just like Columbus." That voice has come to court. This church has remained faithful to the humane purpose of our religion, and in addition to the other Unitarian tradition, that of intellectual integrity. When he left us, Wayne said, "This is for keeps," and it was. Along with my family, my whole life has been focused on the Unitarian Church and the philosophy I gained from my association here. I have hoped to live to see this day when, once more with you, I can thank you for what you have given me.
Will now receive the offering for the welfare of this congregation. In the tradition of the free faith, our churches rely upon the generosity and investments of our members and friends, and all that you can give is greatly appreciated. In keeping with our theme of remembering and reconnecting with our roots, this morning's reading is from Historical Sketches of Universalism and relates the happenings at a conference of Universalists in 1821. At this session of association, Mr. Pitt Morse received ordination as an evangelist, that is, without charge of any particular congregation. He had received the fellowship of the Genesee Branch Association in the fall of the preceding year. Though personally known to many members of the council, still few in central New York had any knowledge of his talents as a preacher. The older clergymen were desirous of knowing more of his ability to sustain the pulpit before granting the request for ordination. It was accordingly arranged that he should preach the morning sermon on the following day. On these anniversary occasions, it was always intended to have the desk well sustained, especially on the second day, and this was so generally understood that many persons made arrangements to attend on that day in preference to the preceding. The chagrin and disappointment of many of the congregation on entering the house was apparent and undisguised. Some uttered their indignation aloud, saying, they had come miles to hear preaching, and behold, there was a boy in the pulpit. A few of the older preachers were in absolute terror, lest the service should result in failure. And these feelings and apprehensions were so pervading that for a time, few in the congregation ventured to look the young preacher steadily in the face. But the services commenced, the text was given out, and the sermon progressed. The usual silence indicated that the speaker received respectful attention, but it was still apparent that apprehension was not allayed. Nor was it difficult to imagine that the throbbing of hearts from sheer anxiety could be heard throughout the congregation. After a few minutes, however, the large auditory began to look up and to breathe easier. The attention became more obvious, fixed, earnest, and finally intense. And strong men and preachers of many years of trial endurance became wholly absorbed and unconscious of everything save the sermon, but sat motionless, their eyes fixed upon the speaker and weeping like children. Never was a congregation more happily disappointed. A total failure had been feared, and it had terminated in a triumph. Preachers and people were in absolute raptures, and from that moment the character and talent of the young minister were effectually known to the denomination.
That was a dirty trick if I've ever heard one. Is the microphone on? And also, we don't have a volume today. I am old enough now to understand well the relativity of time. Although we're celebrating the 50th anniversary of the formation of West Shore Church, in many ways to me it seems like only yesterday that we gathered in the Lakewood Community Center, a little faithful group, and formed this congregation. For those of us who were involved in those early years, it was an experience that we will never forget. It was exciting, exhilarating, anxiety-producing, and a great deal of fun. There have been many changes in the past 50 years in the world around us and also within our Unitarian movement. In our time, when we started this congregation, closets were for clothing, not from coming out of. We thought fast food was what you ate during Lent, and that outer space was the back of the local theater. And you know what went on there. We were before house husbands, gay rights, computer dating, dual careers, and computer marriages. We were before group therapy and nursing homes. We never heard of FM radio, tape decks, artificial hearts, word processors, yogurt, and about guys who wore earrings. For us, time sharing meant togetherness, not computers or condominiums, and a chip meant a piece of wood. Hardware meant hardware, and software wasn't even a word yet. We lived in a time when there were 5 and 10 cent stores where you could buy things for 5 and 10 cents. The corner drugstore sold ice creams for a nickel and Cokes for a nickel, and for a dime you could buy 1 stamp and about 6 postcards. And gasoline was 19 cents a gallon. In our day, cigarette smoking was fashionable. Grass was mown, Coke was the cold drink, and pot was something you cooked your food in. Rock music was a grandmother's lullaby, and aides were helpers in the principal's office. We were before radar, television, VCRs, credit cards, laser beams, and no one had walked on the moon. And we were also before the sex change operation. We made do with what we had. Changes have also taken place in this congregation. When I was here, I never had this many people at a Sunday morning service. All the ladies who came to the service wore hats and white gloves. All the men wore suits and white shirts and ties. People didn't clap in the service. They were very quiet and respectful. Perhaps, but they didn't clap. But some things have remained the same. There is in this congregation, as there was in the beginning, a sense of community, a feeling of being together, being a unity, without surrendering one's individuality and the differences between individuals which make life so interesting and so challenging. There is here still, as there was in those days, a strong sense of commitment to the ongoing life of the congregation. It's not like it was back then because it was quite different. When we met in the Masonic temple, everything for the service and for the children's program had to be brought from people's homes where it was stored during the week in their basements and attics and nooks and crannies. Every Sunday, all these cars would pull up, and all these people would unload all this equipment and furniture and chairs, carry them upstairs, fix the rooms, and then reverse the process. The big room in which we met in the Masonic temple usually had a dance on Saturday night, so we had to come in and sweep up the empty beer bottles and the cigarette butts and try to air out the room a little bit before we started the service. So in those days, everyone was absolutely essential to the operation, because if you didn't show up, something was missing, something didn't get done, and things were in chaos. In many ways, I think those were the best days of this congregation, because everyone was absolutely essential to the continuing of the operation. But there is still this very strong sense of participation and commitment that I sense in this society. An element which I've found, and I've done 12 years now of interim since I retired from New Haven, and I've had a number of congregations where there's very little of this kind of feeling of being a congregation, being a caring community. But here it is a reality, and in spite of the fact that you've grown so big, it is still a part of your operation. What I miss, of course, are the faces and the presence of some of the names that Roberta mentioned. I'd just like to see this morning If all the charter members would stand up, I'd just like to see all of the faces of all the charter members. Now I want you to remain standing. And I want everybody who became members of this congregation during my ministry to stand up. All the rest of you can go home. Just a bunch of interlopers. It's amazing, though, that there are so many, after 50 years, who are still here amongst our charter members and amongst those who joined in later years. The congregation I'm serving this year as interim in Mount Kisco will be celebrating its 40th anniversary this coming year, and there's not one single charter member left. And I think this tells something about this congregation and what it has meant in the lives of individuals. Because I know many individuals who grew up as children in this congregation and joined as adults, whose lives were transformed in important ways because this congregation existed and served. So while there have been changes, the fundamental and important things are still there. Chosen people. And this has always tended to be true of Unitarianism. We are highly intellectual. We center on the cerebral, the rational power, and we forget that the most important thing in life is not the mind and the reason. It is the emotions. 9/10 of the reason that we do things comes from our emotional life. And we spend a large part of our intellectual power rationalizing what our emotions lead us to do. Because Unitarianism has tended in the past to be too rational, too intellectual, and neglected this deeper aspect of our being, we have tended not to understand the real purpose of religion, which is above all else not just to make sense of life, but to love life, to celebrate life, to give back to life some of the wondrous things that life has given to us, to give back to others some of the richness that those lives have poured into our home. Universalism has challenged us, who come mainly from a Unitarian background, to be more honest and open about our emotions, to listen to them, to understand them, and to use the power of our minds and our reason, yes, but to use them to guide creatively this dynamic emotional power which surges within us. Because if our emotions are not caught up with what our mind is thinking, the thinking is sterile and useless. Universalism has brought a real blessing into our movement. And related to that is the transformation of our ministry and our congregational life as a movement, which has come from the large infusion of women into our ministry. When I became a Unitarian minister in 1944, we had 3 women ministers, and only one of them was serving a congregation. Today, over half of the students who are training for our ministry are women. And some of the leading minds and souls of our movement come from our women ministers. On a personal note, I can say quite frankly that I no longer minister in the way I did 25 or even 50 years ago, primarily because of the gift that our women ministers have brought to me. Because they, along with the impetus of universalism, have helped me to understand that the chief task of a minister is to take the realities, the experiences, the tragedies and joys of life and pass them through one's own soul and mind and share them openly with the congregation. Now, it's too bad it took me so long to learn that, because in 1838, in his famous Divinity School address, Ralph Waldo Emerson said the secret of a great ministry is passing thought through the fire of life. And since I've long been considered myself an Emersonian Unitarian, I have no idea why it took me so long to learn that. which the women helped me to do. But the women have transformed our ministry and the lives of our congregations in essential and important ways. And none of us minister today the way we did in the past because of what we've learned from these women. And a third change, which also relates to the first two, and that is the increasing importance in our congregations of the concept of shared ministry. When I came into the ministry 50 years ago, the minister was the focus and the center of the life of the congregation. If something was to be done, you first asked the minister. If the minister didn't approve, that was the end of it. It was fun to have that kind of power. It was rather stultifying to the life of the congregation. Today, in the congregations I serve, I am well aware that the congregation expects in important ways to share in the ministry. That in our kind of movement, every member is a part of the ministry of the congregation. We minister to one another. We even minister to the minister. As some of you may have known, Pat and I suffered a great loss this past year when our son died in his 36th year. And I do not know how I would have gotten through the way I did that great tragedy if my new congregation, which I'd only just come to a short time before in Mount Kisco, had not been so supportive, who supported me when I cried in the service when I announced this tragedy, who came up afterwards and threw their arms around me and said, I understand. This is ministry. And this is the way our congregations are working today, where everyone is or should be part of the ministry of our movement. These three factors tied together have really transformed Unitarianism. And they've issued in a fourth thing that I want to share with you, which for some people is difficult. And that is a renewed interest in spirituality. Now, what do we mean when we say spirituality? For many Unitarian Universalists, it tends to be an off-putting word. It implies something mystical, esoteric, sort of on the far edges of proper and ordinary conduct. But spirituality is not that. Spirituality is very simple. It is interfusing all the activities and difficulties and problems of life with the human spirit, giving it a dimension which goes beyond the physical and the material, but building into it those values which we hold most supreme. Spirituality is believing in the power of the human spirit in every human individual, and measuring our own actions and the nature of our society by how well we and it function in supporting and strengthening the human spirit in ever-increasing numbers of individuals. Spirituality is a dimension of existence, cutting through all of our activities, all of our being, and challenging us to, in spirit, what we do and the kind of person we are and the sort of relationships we build. Again, you see, going beyond the intellectual and the rational, which can speak eloquently about the necessity of community and brotherhood and sisterhood, but without touching and moving in the way it should, these deeper emotional levels of our being. The tragedy in our world today is the separateness between individuals and groups of individuals. This is what is destroying the fabric of human society. But in our movement, when we are true to our heritage as Unitarian Universalists, if we listen to the Spirit within us and within our community, we know that the solution, though extremely difficult to achieve, is easy to grasp and understand. And that is to break down the barriers between individuals and groups through trust, through the power of the human spirit, to see differences and accept them, to see differences and not only acknowledge them, but to celebrate them. One congregation I did an interim in was very strongly split between a Christian wing and a more humanist wing. The split became so bad that the humanists no longer went to the Sunday morning service. They had a separate discussion group in another part of the building, so you had two congregations, which is certainly not true to the Unitarian Universalist philosophy. My task was to get them to see the wonderful richness they had in this kind of diversity, because each group had something rich and wonderful to share with the other. So I had a service, I had two services. I had a service where I preached on the importance of diversity and the source of richness we find in diversity. And I had one of the elder members of the congregation, a woman, who was part of the Christian group where they said the Lord's Prayer every Sunday, which horrified the humanists, speak briefly about what this prayer had meant to her in a long and very difficult life. And she had every member of the congregation, humanist and Christian alike, in tears. And for the first time, the humanists could see what this meant to this woman. And while they could not share with her the way she felt about this prayer, because it did not speak to them, they could share in the service and celebrate with her when it was said, because they knew what it was doing for Gertrude, how it was helping Gertrude be a stronger and a more creative and a more fulfilled individual. And then the second Sunday, I had a young man do the sermon. He was one of the humanist wing, but his parents were part of the Christian wing. And he talked about what the things that the humanist wing would like in the service meant to them. And while in some ways it was not as moving as Gertrude's talk about the Lord's Prayer, it helped the older people to understand that these so-called irreligious young people were deeply religious, but used a different terminology. And that they could celebrate with them when there were humanist elements in the sermon, not because those elements spoke to them, but because they knew what it did to the individuals who held them. And is not this the essence of Unitarian Universalism? To share and celebrate our differences, not to see them as something that shuts us out or shuts them out, but as something that draws us together, because it all comes from the same human need to find meaning and structure in life, to find the strength to be truly yourself, to be courageous and daring enough to open that self and share ever more fully with others around you and with the life of which you are a part. That is why our movement is so important. That is why it's exciting to see a congregation 50 years old, still growing and dynamic. Because we are, in a sense, an example to the world, a light upon the hill, which shows us how society must transform itself if the human experiment is to continue. So long as there are groups who hold themselves apart, who think they have the final and only truth, and who, if necessary, must use force and destruction to protect and advance it, the communal web of human life will be torn asunder. But if more and more people can get the kind of feeling that we strive to build here and across the country in our Unitarian Universalist congregations, it can make a real difference in the life of the world. It has been a nostalgic experience for me to come back here this weekend and share with you. A bittersweet experience, because as I said, so many that I loved so dearly and who were so important in the beginning of the life of this congregation are no longer here in person, though deeply present in spirit. And here again is an example of spirituality. But it's exciting also to realize that our early and often fumbling efforts to create a great congregation have indeed succeeded. And that there is rich promise here for further growth and further advancement in the understanding of the nature of life and of the human spirit. For me, it is a rare privilege, along with Roberta, to be here with you and to share with you. I won't try to say more, because if I do, I'll start to cry. and I don't want to do that. But it is inspiring and instilling, and it gives me the courage to say that even though I'm 78 years old, I'm going to go on doing interims and trying to strengthen Unitarian Universalist congregations in every way I can, because I believe what we are trying to do as a movement is so essential not only to us and our personal lives, but to the world in which we live. And so I congratulate you on this milestone. Share with you my appreciation for the way you have continued the early experiment that we began, and to challenge you to continue to grow, not necessarily in numbers, because I do not always believe that bigger is better, but to grow in your own spirituality, in your own understanding of the power that resides in each of you to be a transformative influence in the ongoing life of our world. People sometimes say that Unitarian Universalism is an easy religion. It is not. If truly practiced, it is the most difficult religion in the world, because the responsibility for the religion and its achievements rests on each of us and all our fellow Unitarian Universalists. It is not easy. Sometimes I'm jealous of my more orthodox colleagues who have it easy in a way because they only have to say the ancient words and they've done their duty. We say the words, but that's only the beginning. Then we have to give the words, the ideas, the dreams, the shape and form of our own individual human power and our power as a congregation. And this is the challenge that lies before you. And I only hope that I can come back to the 60th anniversary and see how much more wondrous this congregation has become. Now may peace dwell in our hearts and understanding in our minds. May courage strengthen our wills and the love of truth forever guide us. Amen.
Recording for posterity.
Yeah.
What's new?
My mother wants to see it for sure. She's the one that brought me in here.
I'm going to pass in front of you, so don't get my head.
Well, I get most of the 9 o'clock services.